Hello, Acorn Armories here. Today I'm going to take you through this walkthrough of how to assemble a basic small shield. I won't go through all the components here, such as the handle segment, as they deserve their own video themselves, or the boss, as it's really up to you how you choose to assemble that, although I may touch on that in a later video. Either way, I hope you find this instructive and fun, and please enjoy. Now first we're going to start with the actual shape of the shield. In this case I've gone for around, I believe it's around about 54 centimeters in total. I'm using a compass, although you don't necessarily have to make it a round shield. You can do pretty much any color, any shape you want, but in this case I was going round. Now I did make a mistake here, as I do the inside diameter of my boss hole, but I didn't do the outer diameter, so that comes to bite me a bit later when I've got to do a little bit more measuring up on the boss when I come to putting it on. Essentially you just want to draw it out. You want to make sure you draw it in pencil, as you do not want to use pen, as the paint will indeed bleed through it. If you're going to mark in pen, just make little marks and sand them off afterwards. It is entirely possible that you can sand the pen off, but you don't want to leave it on there, especially something like dry wipe or permanent marker. So I've drawn the shape, I've measured that I've got enough material to make all three sides to it, and I will go on to cut the corners off. As you can see, I'm quite chuffed with myself. I will go on to cut all the corners off to make cutting the circle out a little bit easier, so it takes less room on my bench. So at this point the hot knife comes out. I start with doing the boss first, just to sort of get a feel for what I'm doing. In this case I did measure the handle grip out, and I found that a perfect circle was going to be a bit big for it, so I've sort of made it a oval shape, leaving some sides on there. You want to start really by, especially with a hot knife, just even any knife really, you don't just want to dig your way through the foam. You want to slowly work your way through the foam. This will allow for far cleaner cuts. You will want to sort of grab the foam and sort of bend it to open up those cuts that you've made. As you can see, I sort of twist them to cut them open, because sometimes where it's hot it will sort of try to melt back together, and it makes your whole cutting experience a bit difficult. Now as you go through it, you will eventually hit the table. Now my bench is quite thoroughly knackered, so it's a proper workbench. I don't mind if it's a bit damaged, but if you are doing this, you might want to put a cutting mat down, especially if I wouldn't recommend doing this indoors, as it does smell. I should really be wearing face protection, but I'm poor and I can't afford it. And you see I pull the center boss out, and I make sure I have a quick line up of where I want my handle to go. I'm quite happy. I look for a pen frantically. No, right. What I'm doing there with the sanding paper is essentially your blade will dull slightly, but I find just giving it a quick rub on some sandpaper will actually fix that. Not necessarily sharpen it, but get a lot of the scum that builds up on the blade off, as you'll get sort of melted plastic and God knows what on it. Once again, going around the whole diameter of the shield. Doing the same process as we did for the inside. You just want to slowly go around it, and I do make several rotations at this also. But this is the difficult bit at first, is you want to get your first one right, as you will basically be tracing this design as a template onto the other pieces of foam rather than drawing them all out by hand. Right, so now we come to adhesiving, and it's pretty simple. We want to get a fair amount on there. We don't want to drown it, so you basically want to brush it in, because you don't want to leave it snotty. Spray stuff's quite snotty. I'm currently using the e-foam spray, which I found to be better than some of the cheaper upholstery sprays, and for the price, I think it's about £5 a can. I can get some mileage out of it. Um, I can put it on pretty thin in places and brush it around and make it go quite a mile. But what you want to do is you want to really work it out to the edges, and that's so you can achieve a nice good bond on those edges. Because if the edges come apart, your whole shield will come apart, especially if moisture gets in there. So you really, really want to make sure those are sealed properly. I even put a little bit more on. After that, you want to leave it to seal for a little bit and come back to it. Right, time for a break, I think. Unlike other adhesives, it will still be pretty tacky to the touch, but you want to line not all four corners up, you just want to line two sides up to the edges. This will make cutting a bit easier. And then we use the can to sort of roll them flat. You don't have to roll it, you can just sort of drag it around the edges. This just helps get them, to make sure they're nice and on. Now, it won't be touch dry like a lot of other glues will be. It will be quite tacky still, but you want to just give it a little tug to make sure it's okay. When in doubt, leave it till the morning. So I get my knife, because I don't actually have a box cutter. I've got a Swiss Army knife. I'm just going to cut the corners off again. Now this is where it can get a little bit dangerous, as I will actually be not using the hot knife. I will meticulously cut each piece by hand, and this will require me to have a knife sharpener on standby, because the glue will indeed form like a rubber seal on the top, which makes cutting it a little bit difficult, as I found this out. I normally do bigger shields, so it's normally I can just stick them in my vise and get it on with, but this one was proving particularly stubborn for whatever reason. So I go around and remove each part slowly. Take your time. It's not a rush. I reckon this whole thing probably took me about 2 hours, perhaps, if I rush myself. Now, it is something you can do as a novice. I've had a little bit of practice doing this, but I've never actually done a round edge before. Normally, if I do a shield, and I reckon this is why it probably took me a bit longer, is this actually has a round edge. Normally with a square edge or squared edge, you can just pretty much slice down the edge and then sand it flush afterwards. I didn't actually get that luxury with this one. But once you've got your edges through, you then want to cut out the boss and trace it onto another piece of foam and rinse and repeat. Once you've got the boss out, you then want to begin the last part of the gluing phase. I actually had the bits I needed ready to rock and roll. So you want to glue all of it together, same way you did last time. You only need 3 layers, or you can just buy it at 30 or 25 mil. That's entirely up to you, but same as before. no difference there. Rinse and repeat. Once it's ready to go, you set it down and just cut it out. It's almost like deja vu, really. Now, this one will be a bit more tricky as you'll have more material in the way. You could just cut it as short as you can and sand it off, but as you can see, I've got a pretty heavy grade sanding tool. I will admit you probably should wear face protection for this, but once again, I'm skint and I can't afford such things. And we're just going to work our way through until it's smooth. I've got no real tutorial for this part of it. You just sort of have to go with your gut on this one, as there's no way I can instruct you via the medium of narration. So, enjoy. So after this, you'll pretty much just want to sand down any rough edges. Especially if you use a power sander, you'll tend to get a little bit of fraying at the end. But that's to be expected. Then you tidy up your workplace real quick. make sure that you don't get any dust where it shouldn't be, especially when it comes to gluing things around. And also check your tools are off, because as I found out after recording all of this, my hot knife was on the entire time. So I measure up the handle section, which I said I will cover how to make one of those a bit later on. And I use a pen to mark where it's going, because I didn't do a pre-mark for this, because I was a bit keen to try out my new toys. So I mark roughly where it is. I don't draw a complete outline, just need to roughly mark. And I just get a little bit of sanding paper in there. I then get the impact adhesive, and I just paint a little bit on. I've snipped my brush short as not to sort of get too much on there. Also means you can control the glue a little bit better. Once again, you probably should wear a mask, and my garage is pretty well ventilated. The roof isn't properly sealed, so to speak, so it wasn't too bad. But you want to put it on both sides, both the handle sections and the shield. As you can see, I'm tidying up the edges with a lolly stick. Very important tool is a lolly stick. Make sure you get plenty on there. Now, one thing I will say is when this stuff is dry, you want to make sure it is dry to the touch, as in you look at it and go, surely that won't stick. And I mean dry to the touch, cold but dry. Otherwise, it will still be snotty. You'll go to stick it on there and it will just not stick at all. And I've been in that situation, and it is all round bad times. And once you're done, you want once again to take a break. Last time, the joke's getting old now. So as we can see, I walk up, I touch it, and there is nothing sticking to my hands. And then you want to carefully, and I mean carefully, line it up. I did muck it up a bit, because if you tear it off, you'll tear all the glue with it. And then you'll have to repeat the whole process. You can sort of shift it along a little bit, but once it's on there, it's on there. And you'll see I give it a good bang. There you go, when it's on. Might even get a roll. You can even get a roller and roll it on. It will feel a bit loose in places, but you want to make sure the edges are stuck down. As you can see, I'll give it a quick roll. When in doubt, you can leave it overnight, but for the purposes of making this video, I was sort of trying to be a bit quick. So all your components with this glue will feel a little bit loose, but if you leave it to dry overnight, like you'd be amazed what that in itself achieves. So never underestimate that. I may get the lolly stick in there a little bit. You can. I in this case used a little bit of super glue just to poke any loose edges down, but that's not for everyone. After this, we stick the boss on very much the same way. As you can see, I'm currently working out where it's supposed to go. I then make some quick markings of my own, which when I find my pen, I then make some quick markings of my own and just gently apply it. Now you could just slop it on everywhere. I don't do that, as it will affect the paint underneath. This will depend what paint you use, but I found it actually bled through the paint. So you don't really want to get too much on there. You can cover it up after a few coats, but it's not really the point. Now, you want to get enough on both sides, and you want to make sure it's properly done, as there's nothing worse than a loose boss. I believe I did have this problem. Once again, I used a bit of super glue to glue it down. It's a very, very bodgy solution, but it works. But when super glue touches this foam, if you get too much on, like I did in this particular example, which I didn't show, it will start to smoke. If that happens, you should really open all your windows and get out of the room immediately. I, however, persevered and burnt the inside of my nostril. So we're once again being very careful. Put it onto the front, give it a little push, turn it upside down, give it another little push. Absolutely cracking. Right, at this point we then get our strips out. I actually had these pre-made. I actually ordered these to size. Unfortunately, they didn't tell me they were going to cut them into metre length, so I had to glue them on. Using my trusty vise, and I cannot tell you how much that vise has already paid for itself. You want to get it into a position where you can work it. I leave it fairly loose so I can spin it, and this is to aid when I put it on. Now, I'll admit, I use the impact adhesive, and I really wish I didn't. I would actually recommend using the spray adhesive, actually spraying the adhesive into the lid and then brushing it on. It's a pretty messy solution, but you probably could tape the edges and it would probably work. The reason I say that is I don't know why I couldn't get the impact glue to work, especially when you've got to cut it before you join the two pieces together. I couldn't tell you why it didn't work, but I found the glue just was an absolute pain in the backside to work with in such a small surface area, and the spray adhesive would probably do just as good of a job and would take less time to dry. It was probably when I was painting the actual strip, I say painting, applying the adhesive to the actual strip, the shield probably dried out a little too much, and unfortunately I didn't really get a good stick, so I had to go around it with a bit of extra adhesive. I do find out the hard way here that having marked where I wanted to glue to, I find out the hard way here that actually trying to glue it this way just isn't going to work, as I don't really want the parts to touch the floor. Admittedly, you could probably chop it up and glue it in segments, but I was being lazy, and I felt it would have achieved a more symmetrical edging. I then come back after it's done. The glue does adhere, but it's the part where it comes to actually attaching the two ends, because you don't attach the two ends like you're putting two pieces of cable together. You actually cut it, if this makes sense, at a angle, which I unfortunately failed to show because I didn't have enough hands to hold the camera and I needed the light where it was. You cut it at an angle, and then you glue it on and slice it flat and then sand it round. As you can see, I leave a bit here. As you might be able to see it. I then try and glue. I try to match roughly where it's got to be. I mark it. A slight angle. You probably could go a sharper angle than I did, but I do it very haphazardly. Slice a bit off. Realise where it's got to be, and I think to myself, I could try a bit more adhesive. Realising that I'd probably be there for absolutely ever, waiting for those two pieces to dry again, and trying to keep them separated when that was happening. Probably not going to work. So I get a brush and I get a spare lid I had lying around. Spray some in there. You'll see it actually steam. I use a makeshift table. All at the back of my head. Great cinematography there, Tom. So we paint a bit on both sides. I then use the high-tech method of drying it by using my mouth, which admittedly you probably shouldn't be doing around glue, but I couldn't get it to stick for some reason. And I think it was because I had the other glue already on there. Now, I did manage to get it to stick eventually, with some difficulty and much swearing. Then you basically just want to run the tin pretty much around the entire thing. Hold it on. I got a bit bored during my break, ran out of tunes. Roll it round, roll it up. Wonderful. Then want to get your knife and cut it flat. I'd give it a little longer. I got a bit impatient and picked up my sander and tried to go at it pretty much immediately and tore a little bit off. But I got it roughly where I wanted it, and that's what matters. As you see, a little bit there, I just pull it off, then sand it flat. That's probably what I should have done, but I was being impatient because I had a brand new toy. And the testosterone kicked in and I made a mistake. That happens. And at that point I realised I'm recording and smoking, which is a little bit naughty. But I'm more or less done at this point, so I decide, having sanded a lot of it off, there we go. I then proceed to sand whatever glue I have left off the shield, because you can't pick it off, it's just good to buff it off a little bit. Unfortunately, that's not really good for painting. Luckily, this isn't a very dusty foam when it comes to hand sanding. You can't just sort of brush it. And then at that point, you want to heat seal it. Now, the way I do that is with a heat gun. I go around the edges as well to get the excess glue off, as once again that comes through when you're painting. and at that point you are pretty much done. At this point, you're ready to paint, but I'd give it a good 12 to 24 hours for all the glue to harden and finish. However, um, I got all the foam I use from Tig's, I believe it's cosplay. I really like it. This particular stuff is the 65 high density foam. Um, it's very, very good stuff, although the 45 will work just fine. I ordered the high density by complete accident. But I was very happy with it in the end, and it has made some absolutely fantastic stuff. Um, I spoke to them actually today about an order I'm doing, and they've been very gracious to speak to me as well as send me some bits to try out. So I can't help but recommend them because their customer service was absolutely fantastic, and the gentleman whose name I can't remember, I do apologise, was actually very nice. Although he was a little bit miffed, I had bought all of his 45 foam out, and he's had to order a new pallet. Sorry, but ultimately, I will link all the stuff, all the foam I used from them in this video, in the description, so you can have a look yourself. Until then, I've been Acorn Armories. Take care.